Have you ever sat at a dinner table and felt the world turn against you, even when it should have been safe and familiar? That's exactly what happened to me one evening when my wife's brother brought his new girlfriend over for the first time. At first, I thought it would be a simple, polite family dinner, smiles, small talk, maybe a little laughter. But nothing could have prepared me for the sharp, cutting words that came my way, the way everyone seemed to join in, and the mocking that hid something far deeper. I remember feeling my chest tighten, forcing a calm smile while my mind raced. The casual cruelty, the jokes that weren't really jokes, and the way my wife seemed just a little too distracted, it all left me uneasy. Little did I know that night would mark the beginning of a journey I could never have imagined. One of betrayal, silent suffering, patience, and the slow, deliberate unfolding of justice. Tonight, I want to take you through the story of how what began as humiliation turned into clarity, truth, and a reckoning that no one in my family saw coming. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was overthinking. I poured a glass of water and sat in the living room, listening to the faint hum of the fridge. My mind wouldn't stop turning over every detail from dinner. The way Tessa's voice cut through the conversation, how Mark didn't notice my discomfort, and Lauren's strange, almost guilty smile. Maybe it's nothing, I whispered to myself, but the thought didn't settle. Something about the way she said, right under your nose, felt deliberate, like a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. Over the next few days, I noticed small things I hadn't before. Lauren became protective of her phone in a new way, always keeping it close, always turning the screen down when I entered the room. I overheard her laugh softly at a message while thinking I couldn't see. When I asked casually, "Who's texting?" she said, "No one, just work stuff," too quickly. My stomach sank. It was subtle, but the tension in her tone was unmistakable. She had never lied to me like that before, at least not so obviously. I found myself replaying the dinner repeatedly. I remembered how Tessa had made jokes about my job. "Oh, you mean you sit in an office all day?" And the table had laughed. I tried to tell myself it was harmless teasing, that family gatherings always had that banter, but there was a sharpness to it I couldn't ignore. When I thought about her flicking her eyes toward Lauren, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lauren wasn't just ignoring the joke. She knew something I didn't. That thought made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in years. One night, I tried to confront the fear in a small way. Lauren and I were in the kitchen making coffee, and I asked casually, "Are we okay?" She laughed softly. "Of course," she said. Why would we not be okay? But her eyes darted toward her phone on the counter. I noticed she grabbed it quickly and put it in her pocket. I said nothing, though my fingers itched to check it. Instead, I said, "Okay," and left the room. The following weekend, Tessa came over again. I tried to engage her politely, asking about her work and her family. She smiled in that same sharp way and said, "It must be nice having someone who never notices anything." I blinked, unsure how to respond. Mark chuckled nervously and Lauren said, "Tessa, stop." But I could see her smirk just slightly, as if she found the comment amusing. I excused myself early that night, claiming a headache, and went to the guest room to lie down. I felt my chest tighten as I stared at the ceiling, replaying the comments, the laughter, and Tessa's eyes on Lauren. The words echoed, "right under your nose." By Monday, I decided to observe rather than confront. I watched Lauren's patterns closely, noticing late nights at work and her habit of keeping her phone hidden. Sometimes she would laugh softly at a text and glance at me as if nothing was wrong. I tried to believe it was nothing, but each lie chipped at the trust we'd built. I started writing notes to myself about conversations, dates, and times. It felt obsessive, but I couldn't stop. Something was off, and I needed to know what. One evening, I found a small piece of evidence by accident. Lauren had left her tablet on the couch while she rushed to answer a doorbell. A notification popped up. I almost didn't look, but curiosity and annoying fear got the better of me. The message wasn't explicit, but it was intimate. "Can't wait to see you," it read, and it wasn't from a coworker I recognized. My stomach dropped and my hands shook. I put the tablet down quickly before she returned, heart pounding. I knew what I had seen couldn't be ignored. When Lauren came back, I didn't say anything at first. She kissed my cheek and asked if I wanted to watch a show. I nodded, my mind spinning. Every laugh, every joke from Tessa, every flicker of Lauren's eyes during dinner came rushing back. The realization hit me like a cold wave. I had been mocked not just for being quiet or reserved, but because someone knew the truth I hadn't seen. My humiliation had been carefully orchestrated, and it stung far more than the betrayal itself. That night, I lay in bed next to Lauren, pretending to sleep while my mind raced. I thought about confronting her immediately, but a part of me knew I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof, and I needed control. My chest ached as I realized that what I had dismissed as a bad dinner, a minor joke, might actually be the first warning of something much darker, an affair carefully hidden in plain sight. The next day, I made an excuse to leave the house early and went for a walk. The air felt heavy, my mind replaying every detail. Tessa's words, Lauren's defensiveness, Mark's laughter. How could I have been so blind? The thought that Lauren had possibly been lying to me for weeks or months gnawed at me, and yet I forced myself to stay calm. If I reacted too quickly, I risked losing the one advantage I still had, the element of surprise. Back at home, I found myself watching the interactions between Lauren and Tessa. Every laugh, every touch, every secret smile now felt layered with hidden meaning. Tessa's presence was like a mirror, reflecting what I had ignored for too long. My stomach churned as I realized that the mockery at dinner was more than rude behavior. It was a message, a signal of a secret alliance I hadn't known existed. That night, I started writing down everything. Not just the messages, not just the dinner, but every detail that felt off. The late nights, the laughter, the hidden glances. I organized the notes in chronological order, each entry heavier than the last. I told myself this wasn't paranoia, this was preparation. I wasn't acting rashly, I was collecting facts. Each note became a small anchor, something solid in a sea of betrayal. Lauren came to bed and asked, "Are you okay?" I lied smoothly, "Yeah, just tired." I felt her shift beside me as if she wanted to ask more, but she didn't. That silence became a kind of battlefield, where words were weapons I wasn't ready to use yet. I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep, but inside, my mind raced with scenarios, questions, and possibilities. I realized that my patience now was more powerful than confrontation. The right moment, I knew, would change everything. By the end of the week, the atmosphere between us had changed. Lauren became quieter around me, less playful. She noticed my scrutiny, and I could see subtle anxiety in her gestures, how she held her coffee cup, how quickly she answered texts. It was the first time I felt a strange sense of control. Not power over her, but clarity in the chaos. I wasn't overreacting anymore. I was alert, prepared, and aware of the cracks in the world I thought was solid. One afternoon, I overheard Tessa on the phone, laughing nervously. "He's too quiet," she said. "He doesn't notice anything. He'll never know until it's too late." My stomach twisted. I knew she meant me. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just listened. Every word confirmed the unease I had felt for weeks. They had underestimated me. They had assumed my silence was weakness. And in that moment, I realized that everything that had happened at dinner, the laughter, the mockery, the subtle digs, was more than social awkwardness. It was a test. And I had passed by surviving it silently. That night, I sat at the kitchen table alone, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I poured a glass of wine and reviewed my notes. Each line was a piece of a puzzle, a map of deception. I could almost see the threads connecting Tessa, Mark, and Lauren, the pattern of lies they had woven. My hands shook, not with fear but with anticipation. I knew the path ahead would be delicate, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of calm. Before sleep, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "I see you, I know." The silence that followed was different from before, it was filled with purpose. The humiliation I had felt at dinner had planted a seed, and now, in the quiet darkness of my own home, it was beginning to grow into something far more potent than embarrassment or anger. It was awareness, it was strategy, it was the first step toward reclaiming the control they had tried to take from me. And as I finally drifted into a restless sleep, I promised myself that the next time we all sat around that table, the power would no longer be theirs. The laughter, the mockery, the careless smiles, they would be met with a quiet, unshakable force that they could neither anticipate nor dismiss. That night, I realized something important. Sometimes, silence is the most dangerous weapon of all. The night had ended in laughter at my expense, but the silence that followed was mine, and it would carry me further than any confrontation could. And I knew deep down that the events of that dinner were only the beginning, the first ripple of a storm that was quietly forming. They had mocked me openly, and I had taken note. And I would wait carefully for the moment when the tables turned, and turn they would. The door to the bedroom closed behind Lauren, and I stared at the faint glow of the city through the window. I could still see her smile in my mind, Tessa's laugh echoing in my ears. I whispered again, almost like a prayer, "I will be ready." The room was silent, but my mind was loud with possibilities. I had seen the first signs, and I would not be caught unaware again. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I had forgotten: anticipation. It was a quiet power, almost imperceptible, but it was mine. The seed of what would come had been planted, watered by their ignorance and nurtured in the dark. I closed my eyes, not with fear, not with anger, but with focus. And in that darkness, I realized that the dinner had not humiliated me, it had awakened me. The night passed, and morning came with its usual routine, but I felt different. I moved through the house with purpose, greeting Lauren and Mark with the same calm I had always tried to maintain. all the while noting every word, every glance, every small interaction. Nothing escaped me anymore, and as I poured my coffee, I thought once more about Tessa, her sharp eyes and cruel laughter. She had underestimated me, assumed that my quiet nature was a flaw, a weakness. But I had learned the first lesson: appearances can deceive, and patience can conceal more than anger ever could. I didn't speak of what I knew, I did confront. I merely observed, and the quiet power of observation was mine. I would let them continue, unaware that I had already begun. That was the first night I understood the true weight of being underestimated. That was the night I knew my silence would become my advantage. That night I resolved that the next time laughter was directed at me, it would meet a calm, unshakable force they would never see coming. And with that thought, I let myself finally rest, knowing the real story had not yet begun. I didn't confront Lauren immediately. The night of Tessa's mocking laughter replayed in my mind, but I knew I needed more than suspicion. If I acted too quickly, I risked everything I wanted: clarity, proof, and the ability to see the full picture before taking action. So I decided to watch, to observe, to learn. I started by paying attention to the little things: the way Lauren kept her phone closed at all times, how she smiled too quickly at a message, how her excuses for late nights seemed rehearsed. I reminded myself constantly, do not react. Wait. A week passed and I noticed Tessa changing her behavior around me. Her smiles were tighter, her eyes darted nervously when she thought I wasn't watching, and her teasing grew less confident. You look tired, she said one evening when we met for a casual family dinner. I smiled politely. Just a long day. She leaned back, trying to gauge my reaction. Sure, sure, long day. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was alert, recording everything mentally. My patience was becoming a weapon. One night, Lauren left her tablet on the kitchen counter as she rushed to answer the doorbell. My heart pounded as a message popped up from someone named Matt, someone I didn't know. The words weren't explicit, but they were intimate enough to confirm every doubt I had. Can't wait to see you later, it read. My hands shook as I put the tablet down before she returned. My stomach twisted, a mix of relief and horror. Relief that I finally had evidence, horror that the betrayal was real. When Lauren came back, she was smiling. Who's at the door? She asked, unaware of what I had seen. I forced a smile. Just a delivery. I kept my voice even. Inside, I was seething silently, processing the fact that the woman who had mocked me at dinner had been right all along. There was something Lauren had hidden from me, something big. Over the next few days, I quietly documented everything. I noted the times Lauren left the house for work, the way she texted in secret, the subtle glances she shared with Tessa that seemed to communicate more than casual conversation should. I replayed every conversation in my head, every joke, every casual tease that now carried a darker undertone. My chest ached, not just from betrayal, but from the humiliation I had endured at the dinner table, surrounded by laughter that had masked a secret I hadn't even known existed. Finally, I decided it was time to confront, but not in anger. I waited until the evening when the house was quiet, the children asleep, and Lauren was unaware of my focus. She was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone when I walked in. Lauren, I said, calm but firm. She looked up. Yes, her voice carried no hint of suspicion, only casual curiosity. I held up the tablet. Explain this. Her eyes widened as she recognized the message. I can explain, she stammered. It's not what it looks like. I took a slow breath. It looks like you've been communicating secretly with someone in a way that crosses boundaries. Am I wrong? I kept my voice steady. She bit her lip. No, you're not wrong. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was lonely and it started. My stomach twisted. How long? I asked softly, almost whispering. A few months, she admitted. The word hit me like a punch, a confirmation of all my fears. Why hide it? I asked, my tone calm, but inside I felt the anger simmering. Because I didn't want to hurt you, she said, tears forming. I didn't know how to stop it either. I'm sorry. I listened silently, taking in her words. Her confession was honest, but it didn't erase the humiliation of the dinner, the laughter I had endured while she carried this secret. Do you understand how it feels to be mocked while everyone knows the truth except you? I asked quietly. She shook her head, unable to meet my eyes. Mark's girlfriend, Tessa, had been an instrument in all of this. I replayed her words, her laughter, her constant teasing, and the way she had looked at Lauren in that fleeting, knowing glance. It had all been deliberate. They had assumed I would never see, that I would never understand. That assumption had been their mistake. I realized in that moment that their underestimation of me was my advantage. I could play this situation in a way they would never anticipate. Lauren continued to cry, apologizing again and again. I made a mistake, she said, voice breaking. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I love you and I want to fix this. I nodded slowly. Love isn't enough anymore, I said softly. Not without honesty. She looked at me, despair in her eyes. What do you want me to do? I didn't answer immediately. I needed her to understand that the damage was not just in the act, but in the secrecy, the deception, and the public humiliation that had been carefully orchestrated by someone who thought they could get away with it. Days went on and I maintained my calm, outwardly acting as if everything was normal. At family gatherings, I smiled politely at Tessa, keeping my eyes neutral. I listened to her jokes, her casual digs, noting every inflection, every shift in tone. She tried to provoke me subtly, but I kept my composure. I realized that she had underestimated me completely, assuming that silence meant weakness. The irony was bitter but empowering. I was no longer just a victim. I was preparing for the next steps with clarity and precision. One evening, Lauren asked me if we could have a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us. I agreed, but inside I had already made a decision. I needed her to see that actions have consequences, that mockery and secrecy can't go unexamined. During the dinner, I asked casually about her day, watching for any hint of deception. Work was fine, she said. Just busy as usual. I nodded, smiling slightly, but my mind noted the hesitation, the way she avoided eye contact. The facade was thin and I could see through it. As the week continued, I noticed Tessa becoming increasingly uneasy around me. She would glance toward me nervously, her confident tone faltering when she realized I was observing. Even Mark seemed unsettled, though he couldn't articulate why. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. I realized that my silence, my patience, and my focus were already starting to unsettle them. I didn't need to act aggressively. Awareness alone was enough to begin shifting the balance. Late one night, Lauren finally admitted the full extent of the communication. I didn't know how to stop it, she whispered. I tried, but every time I would pull away, he would, I don't know, reach out, and I couldn't resist. I listened calmly. You see, I said quietly, you think I'm naive, that I won't notice, that I'll let it slide. You were wrong, she nodded, tears streaming down her face, understanding for the first time the depth of my awareness. I didn't yell, didn't throw accusations. I simply stated facts quietly and firmly and let the weight of truth hang in the room. You've made choices, I said, and now the consequences are yours to face. I won't be mocked or deceived anymore, and neither will you or anyone else involved. She sobbed and I let her. I didn't need to raise my voice. My calm had more impact than any outburst ever could. The following days were a careful balance. I maintained normal routines while subtly gathering evidence of the affair, timing messages, and noting interactions. I could feel the tension growing between Lauren and Tessa, and between Tessa and Mark. Each observation confirmed my suspicion. They had misjudged me. My quiet patience was now a looming presence in their minds. Tessa would glance at me nervously, trying to gauge what I knew. Mark's jokes became fewer, more cautious. Lauren's attempts to normalize everything felt strained. Every morning, I reviewed my notes, my observations, and the subtle shifts in behavior. I didn't speak of it to anyone, but internally I was constructing a map, a timeline, a strategy. I realized that confrontation at the wrong time would only serve to make them defensive. Instead, I needed patience, observation, and control. My silence had become a tool far more effective than any argument. One afternoon, I found myself replaying the dinner in my mind again. Tessa's mocking smile, the laughter that had seemed so casual, Lauren's fleeting glance, all of it suddenly became clear. They had tested me, tried to humiliate me, and assumed I would crumble. But I hadn't. I had absorbed it silently, analyzed it, and now I held the upper hand, waiting for the right moment to act, not with anger but with precision and calm authority. As I poured a cup of coffee that evening, Lauren approached me. Can we talk? She asked softly. I looked up, smiling faintly. Of course, I said, my tone neutral. Inside, I knew the conversation would be a turning point, but the outcome was not yet determined. Patience was key. I let her speak, letting the words tumble out, all the while noting the hesitations, the truths, and the half-lies. Every statement confirmed my suspicion and strengthened my resolve. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to myself, I see everything, I know everything. Lauren turned toward me, her breath uneven, and I remained calm. My silence, my awareness, my patience, these had become my most potent weapons. And as the darkness closed in around me, I realized that the humiliation, the betrayal, and the lies had already begun to shift in my favor. I would not react with anger or revenge blindly. I would act with clarity, timing, and precision. The night ended quietly, but I knew the story was far from over. I had the proof, I had the awareness, and I had the patience. Tessa had underestimated me, Lauren had underestimated me, and Mark had underestimated me. That misjudgment would soon become their undoing. And in the silence, I understood fully that the next chapter of our lives would be determined not by emotion or outbursts, but by strategy, observation, and careful, deliberate action. The first move had already been made, the move of awareness. And the game was just beginning. After the confrontation, Lauren seemed almost relieved that I hadn't exploded in anger, that I had listened quietly instead of yelling. She kept apologizing, tears streaking her face as she repeated, "I didn't mean for it to go this far, I made a mistake." I nodded, not responding much, letting her words hang in the room. I knew the words themselves didn't matter anymore, the truth had been revealed. What mattered was the action I would take next. I told myself calmly, patience is the weapon, observation is the power. I agreed to work on things, though inside I wasn't forgiving yet. Everyone assumed my calm meant forgiveness. Even Lauren seemed to relax slightly, thinking I had been convinced to move forward. But my silence was deliberate. I spent the next few weeks quietly collecting evidence, making mental notes, and observing interactions between Lauren, Tessa, and Mark. I tracked messages, emails, and the patterns of their communication. Every little detail mattered. My notebook became a ledger of betrayal, each entry a small piece of the puzzle, slowly revealing the full extent of what had been hidden from me. During this period, I noticed something unexpected, tension growing between Mark and Tessa. The woman who had mocked me at dinner now seemed nervous whenever I was around, her confidence faltering. She would fidget, glance at Mark, then glance at me, as if expecting me to expose everything at any moment. Mark, too, seemed less at ease, asking her quietly, "Are you okay?" when she would sometimes grow defensive. I realized then that my silent observation had begun to unsettle them. They hadn't anticipated that I would be patient, deliberate, and aware of everything. One afternoon, I suggested a family gathering, something casual like our previous dinners. I told Lauren it'll be nice to have everyone over, just like old times. She agreed, smiling faintly, relieved that things might return to normal. Tessa, however, gave me a subtle, nervous glance that she quickly tried to cover with a forced smile. Mark, unaware of the storm brewing, laughed and said, "This'll be fun." I nodded politely, silently counting the hours until the evening. When the night came, I was calm, composed, and attentive. Lauren greeted everyone at the door, Mark was in the living room cracking jokes, and Tessa hovered near him, her eyes flicking toward me more than once. I kept my focus, observing everything, the way hands moved, the subtle inflections in voice, the tiny pauses that revealed tension. I had already rehearsed how I would handle the moment. My goal wasn't confrontation. It was clarity, precision, and allowing the truth to reveal itself naturally. As the meal began, I let Lauren start the conversation casually, asking about everyone's work and projects. Tessa, nervous, tried to interject humor, but her usual sharpness was dulled. Mark, sensing tension, shifted in his seat, looking at her with mild concern. I stayed quiet, smiling politely at their small attempts at humor, letting them speak first. Finally, I leaned slightly forward and said softly, "Lauren, can you explain why you've seemed distant lately? It's been noticeable, and I think it's time the family understands." Her expression froze. She blinked, glanced at Tessa, then at Mark, who was now staring at her with a puzzled frown. Silence fell across the table. The usual hum of casual conversation evaporated, leaving only anticipation hanging in the room. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse. I simply let the question linger, watching as Lauren's mind raced for a response. She opened her mouth but didn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly. I cleared my throat softly. "Lauren, it's okay. Just tell them the truth, we all deserve honesty here." The room remained silent. I noticed Tessa fidgeting, her eyes wide, finally revealing the anxiety she had been trying to hide. Mark looked increasingly concerned, realizing something serious was unfolding. Lauren's shoulders slumped as she admitted quietly, I've been seeing someone." Her words were soft but carried the weight of betrayal. The family stared at her in shock. I spoke next, calmly, almost gently, outlining what I had discovered, the messages, the secret meetings, the pattern of deception. "It wasn't just private communication," I said. "It was betrayal. And it's been happening for months." I watched as expressions changed across the room, shock, disbelief, a hint of guilt. Tessa's eyes widened, Mark's face paled, and Lauren's tears fell freely. "I never meant for this to be known like this," Lauren whispered. I nodded, keeping my tone neutral. "Intent doesn't erase consequences." As I continued, I revealed small pieces of evidence I had collected over the past weeks. A timeline of messages, the hidden glances, the discrepancies in stories, everything laid bare. Tessa tried to interject, attempting to defend herself, but I kept control of the room. "Please let the facts speak for themselves," I said. Slowly, their excuses fell apart. The laughter from the first dinner seemed like a distant memory. What remained was clarity, exposure, and the gravity of their actions fully revealed. At that moment, a twist emerged, something I hadn't anticipated entirely but had prepared for mentally. While reviewing Lauren's messages, I discovered that the man she was seeing wasn't single. He was engaged to someone else. His fiancée had been unaware, but my evidence confirmed it. I realized that not only had I uncovered Lauren's betrayal, but I had also stumbled upon a secret that would end someone else's carefully constructed life. I had the choice to act with integrity, and I knew exactly how. I allowed the room to settle into stunned silence, giving each person a moment to absorb the reality. Tessa looked like she might crumble. Mark was pale, trying to make sense of his own involvement, and Lauren was sobbing quietly. I leaned back, calm and collected, knowing that my patient strategy had reached this point naturally. They had assumed I would react with anger, but instead I had created the perfect moment for truth to reveal itself. Sometimes, I said softly, people assume that silence is weakness. They underestimate what can happen when someone is watching and waiting. The words hung in the air, Tessa's hands shook, Mark swallowed hard. Lauren looked at me, a mixture of shame and fear in her eyes. I see now, she whispered. I see how much you noticed, how much you understood. Over the following week, the consequences began to unfold naturally. Lauren's affair partner's engagement collapsed once I discreetly provided evidence to the right people. Tessa's position within the family became tenuous as Mark realized how much she had contributed to my humiliation. Lauren and I didn't immediately separate, but our relationship had irrevocably changed. The trust that had been broken couldn't be restored overnight, and I made it clear that my patience had limits. The twist of discovering the other man's engagement also allowed me to see a broader perspective. Betrayal often extends beyond the immediate circle, touching lives in unexpected ways. By remaining calm and observant, I was able to act in a way that revealed truths without unnecessary destruction. I had learned the power of patience, strategy, and timing. My anger had been transformed into a precise instrument for justice. Even within my own family, the balance shifted. Tessa's previously sharp remarks now carried hesitation. She attempted small jokes, but I met them with polite acknowledgement and a neutral expression. She flinched visibly each time she tried to provoke a reaction. Mark became cautious, questioning choices he had previously ignored. Lauren was forced to confront the magnitude of her decisions daily. The dynamics had shifted completely without me ever needing to yell or escalate. One evening, Lauren approached me, voice quiet. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, tears brimming. I looked at her evenly. "You can't fix it by lying, by pretending, or by expecting forgiveness without honesty. That's gone now. The only way forward is clarity and integrity." She nodded, realizing for the first time that the consequences were hers to bear and that my patience had been deliberate, not passive. Through all of this, I maintained the calm exterior that had become my armor. Inside, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and relief, not in hurting them, but in seeing justice unfold naturally. The revelation of Lauren's full betrayal, the exposure of the other man's engagement, and the subtle fear in Tessa and Mark had created a balance that words alone could never achieve. Silence, observation, and timing had done more than anger ever could. By the end of the month, the tension had settled into a strange normalcy. Lauren and I were in a new phase, one defined not by ignorance or denial, but by understanding and accountability. Tessa had withdrawn slightly from family interactions, Mark was careful in his behavior, and I had regained a sense of control and dignity that I hadn't realized I had lost. The twist, the discovery of the engaged man, was a final confirmation that patience and careful observation could reveal layers of truth others preferred to hide. That night, alone in the living room, I reflected on everything that had happened. The dinner that had humiliated me, the weeks of silent observation, the confrontation, and the strategic revelation of Lauren's betrayal, all of it had been part of a long, deliberate process. I realized that revenge isn't always about dramatic gestures or immediate consequences. Sometimes it's about allowing truth to unfold naturally, letting the weight of deception reveal itself without unnecessary force. I whispered to myself almost like a mantra, silence is power, patience is clarity, observation is justice. The lessons were clear and the strategy had worked. I had been underestimated, mocked, and humiliated, but by staying calm and deliberate, I had turned their underestimation into an advantage. Tessa, Lauren, Mark, they all understood now without me needing to raise my voice. And as I prepared for the next chapter of our lives, I felt a sense of anticipation, knowing that the full impact of truth was still settling, still reshaping relationships and perceptions. I had started as the quiet one, the one assumed to be weak, and now I was the one guiding the narrative, ensuring that honesty and accountability were finally at the forefront. The night ended in quiet reflection, and for the first time since that dinner, I felt a sense of control that went beyond mere survival. The mockery, the betrayal, the hidden glances, all had led to this precise moment of clarity. The twist of discovering the engaged man had amplified the impact, confirming the depth of deception and the consequences that followed. I knew that the following weeks would continue to reveal truths, but I was ready. My patience had become my strategy, my observation my power, and my calmness a shield against the chaos they had expected me to create. I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming dignity, respect, and justice, not through anger, but through deliberate, calculated awareness. And as I turned off the lights that night, I felt a quiet confidence settle over me. The twist had reshaped everything, but the ultimate lesson remained simple: underestimate the quiet and you give them the power to see what others refuse to notice. I was no longer naive. I was no longer mocked, and I was ready for the consequences they had long ignored. After the family gathering, the consequences unfolded faster than I had anticipated, though I had prepared for patience rather than immediate action. Lauren and I sat in the living room that evening, the quiet tension between us heavier than any conversation. She spoke softly. I can't believe this all came out like this. I nodded, keeping my tone calm, measured. The truth has a way of finding its own timing, I said. What's done cannot be undone, but we have to move forward responsibly. She looked down, tears streaming silently. The reality of her betrayal, of Tessa's role, and the ripple effect it had caused was settling over her. She finally understood that the game she had thought she controlled had long shifted beyond her influence. Within days, news of Lauren's affair partner's engagement being exposed spread discreetly to the right circles. The man had been engaged for over a year, and the revelation ended the engagement almost immediately. I had chosen carefully who to inform, ensuring that the consequences were both just and proportionate. Tessa's nerves intensified as Mark realized how much she had contributed to the humiliation I had suffered. She no longer tried to provoke me with jokes or pointed remarks. Instead, she avoided my gaze and whispered behind closed doors, clearly unsettled by how the situation had been handled. Lauren and I separated quietly without public drama, but it was clear that trust had been shattered. The betrayal and secrecy couldn't be undone, and both of us understood that reconciliation would be impossible without full accountability. I don't blame you for being distant now, she said one night, sitting on the edge of the bed, voice trembling. I shook my head gently. Distance is the result of choices, I said. We both need to accept what's happened and live with it responsibly. We didn't argue, we didn't yell. Instead, a heavy, solemn understanding filled the space between us. The pain was real, but it was quiet, measured, and necessary. Mark, too, faced consequences. He had been naive, unaware of the depth of Tessa's manipulation, and I could see him grappling with his role. Their breakup happened not because I forced it, but because the dynamics had shifted in ways they couldn't ignore. Tessa, who had once mocked me openly, now avoided interactions, her confidence broken by the realization that her manipulations had been observed and recorded meticulously. She had underestimated the quiet strength of someone who had been wronged and assumed silence meant weakness. I focused on rebuilding my own life, step by step. Each day, I took small actions to reclaim dignity and personal space that had been eroded by the betrayal. Simple things, taking long walks, reorganizing my home, reconnecting with friends, became a reminder that life could continue without allowing bitterness to take root. I kept the lessons of patience, observation, and deliberate action close to heart, knowing they had saved me from blind rage or impulsive decisions that would have had long-term consequences. One afternoon, I met a friend for coffee and we spoke quietly about relationships and trust. You have to protect your peace, she said gently. I nodded, realizing that protecting my own integrity had been more powerful than exposing anyone recklessly. The events that had unfolded had already done justice without my direct interference in a destructive way. Karma, as it turned out, had a subtle and patient hand, moving things into place in ways that didn't require me to act with anger. I reflected on how Tessa had mocked me at that first dinner, how Mark and Lauren had underestimated me, and how I had silently absorbed every detail, every word, every glance. That initial humiliation, once sharp and cutting, had transformed into a foundation of clarity and power. I had learned that revenge isn't always immediate. Sometimes it's measured, calculated, and delivered through the natural consequences of deceit. The patience I had practiced had been the true act of reclaiming my dignity. Lauren approached me one evening, hesitating before speaking. Do you think we can ever be okay again? She asked softly, voice trembling. I shook my head gently. We can move forward separately with honesty and understanding, but what's broken cannot be completely repaired. Trust, once publicly betrayed, is a fragile thing. She nodded, tears in her eyes, finally accepting the reality she had created. It wasn't a punishment I inflicted, it was the natural result of her choices and deception. Over the following weeks, family gatherings became quieter. Tessa avoided interactions, Mark kept his distance, and Lauren respected the new boundaries. I observed without malice, understanding that my presence alone, calm and composed, communicated more than words ever could. The laughter that had once mocked me no longer held power. It had been replaced with respect, understanding, and a recognition that deceit has consequences that extend far beyond immediate moments of shame. I focused on my own well-being, establishing routines that reinforced self-respect and independence. I spent time with friends who valued honesty, rekindled hobbies I had neglected, and allowed myself to experience life without the weight of betrayal consuming every thought. In doing so, I discovered that revenge is not always about dramatic exposure. Sometimes it is about reclaiming your own life, walking forward with dignity, and letting the consequences of deceit naturally unfold around you. Lauren and I had conversations about boundaries, respect, and accountability. We spoke about the impact of her actions, the lessons learned, and the changes that needed to occur for both of us to move forward separately. I realized that allowing the truth to settle naturally had been more powerful than confrontation could ever be. Her acknowledgement of her actions, combined with the social and personal consequences she faced, created a sense of justice that was subtle yet complete. One day, I reflected on the dinner, the mocking words, and the underestimation I had endured. I realized that those moments had been a catalyst for personal growth. The humiliation I had felt had taught me the importance of patience, observation, and measured action. It had shown me that revenge doesn't require chaos or anger. It can manifest quietly, through strategy, clarity, and a calm awareness that ensures justice without unnecessary harm. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and felt a sense of empowerment I hadn't known before. I had been underestimated, mocked, and betrayed, but I had responded not with reckless anger, but with deliberate thought and patient action. The people who had hurt me had learned the weight of their choices through natural consequences. Tessa, Mark, and Lauren had each faced the reality of their actions, and I had reclaimed control over my own life without compromising my integrity. The twist of Lauren's affair partner being engaged had amplified the impact of the exposure. Karma, it seemed, had a precise and patient way of balancing things, even when human understanding was limited. By remaining calm and deliberate, I had ensured that truth revealed itself fully and effectively, without the need for dramatic confrontation. Observation, patience, and clarity had done more than anger ever could. Over time, the family dynamics stabilized, but the lessons remained. I had discovered the strength of silent resilience, the power of deliberate patience, and the importance of letting consequences unfold naturally. The laughter that had once humiliated me was replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of reality. People saw me differently now, not because I had shouted or punished, but because I had observed, understood, and acted with clarity. I rebuilt my life deliberately. I pursued personal goals, strengthened friendships, and reclaimed my own space. I realized that revenge, true revenge, doesn't always involve retaliation. It often means refusing to remain small, refusing to accept humiliation, and letting the natural consequences of deceit work themselves out. By maintaining dignity and focus, I had achieved a form of justice more lasting than any emotional outburst could have delivered. Looking back, I understood the full arc of the story. Tessa's mockery at dinner, Lauren's betrayal, Mark's naivete, they had all set the stage for a powerful lesson in patience and strategy. The silence that followed the initial humiliation had been my ally, allowing me to observe, plan, and ensure that truth revealed itself without my direct interference. The twist, the exposure of the engaged man, had been a confirmation of how far deception can reach, and how carefully measured action can restore balance. By the end, I had walked away not with anger or bitterness, but with clarity, control, and a renewed sense of self. The family had learned lessons, the betrayers had faced consequences, and I had reclaimed my dignity. The story wasn't about punishment. It was about justice, awareness, and the quiet, unshakable strength that comes from knowing, observing, and acting with patience. And as I prepared for the next chapter of my life, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The past had been difficult, but it had taught me that true revenge is subtle, deliberate, and measured. Mockery thrives in secrecy, but truth, when paired with patience, has the power to correct imbalance without chaos. I had been underestimated, and that had been their greatest mistake. Now I walked forward lighter, stronger, and wiser, knowing I never needed to harm others to reclaim my power. I focused on rebuilding not just my home, but my sense of self. I allowed joy to return in small increments, laughing freely, trusting selectively, and appreciating the quiet moments that once seemed ordinary. I realized that reclaiming life after betrayal doesn't require drama. It requires patience, strategy, and steadfast commitment to integrity. I had found that, and it was liberating. The family had changed, but not without reason. Lessons had been learned, boundaries reestablished, and the quiet strength I had cultivated now spoke louder than any words ever could. I had transformed humiliation into power, betrayal into awareness, and secrecy into truth. And in that transformation, I had finally found my own form of justice, a life rebuilt with dignity and clarity. The past could not be erased, but it could inform every step forward. I had faced deception, observed it silently, and allowed the natural consequences to play out. That patience, that awareness, and that deliberate calm had become my greatest tools. The laughter, once directed at me, had been replaced with acknowledgement, and the subtle fear of underestimation now rested in the minds of those who had tried to manipulate me. In the quiet, I reflected on all I had learned. Revenge isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your own life, letting truth settle, and allowing consequences to unfold naturally. By observing carefully, acting with precision, and maintaining dignity, I had achieved justice far greater than anger could have delivered. Tessa, Mark, and Lauren had learned their lessons, and I had reclaimed my life with strength, clarity, and calm resolve. And as the sun rose over the house the next morning, I understood fully that mockery thrives in secrecy, but silence paired with patience allows truth to carry the weight of justice. I had endured, I had observed, and I had acted in ways they never imagined. The past no longer held power over me, and the future was mine to shape. I walked forward knowing I never had to laugh at anyone else to feel strength again. I had found my peace, my clarity, and my justice, all through patience, observation, and deliberate action. Looking back, the journey taught me more than anger or revenge ever could. I learned that patience is a weapon, observation is power, and silence paired with strategy can reveal truths that anger alone cannot. The people who mocked me, deceived me, and underestimated me had to face the consequences of their actions, not because I sought to hurt them, but because truth has a way of unfolding when allowed the time and space to do so. I rebuilt my life deliberately, reclaiming dignity, trust, and a sense of self that betrayal had tried to steal. Sometimes, revenge isn't about destruction. It's about refusing to stay small, letting consequences naturally reach those who deserve them, and walking forward lighter, stronger, and wiser. My story is proof that mockery thrives in secrecy, but truth, patience, and clarity will always carry the weight of justice in the end.